Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the last regulatory hour of 2023. On behalf of the Federation Board of Directors, it's my privilege today to welcome you and to welcome Dale Atkinson as our presenter today. This session will be recorded and made available, so please, in addition to folks that are able to be here today, do share information about the session in your networks. And with that, I will turn it over to Dale.
Thank you, Michelle, and I will also add my welcome to this December FSBPT regulatory hour, and thank you all for being here. A couple of kind of housekeeping to get us going, to get us warmed up is these regulatory hours are intended to encourage participation. So if you have something to say, throw it into the chat, unmute, and you can speak. Whatever it takes to make sure that we, myself, and your organization meet the needs that are pressing for you all. So I want to at least emphasize that. The other thing I want to emphasize as we get started here, as we roll into 2024, is that if there are topics that are relevant to you, an attendee here, a regulator, a member, if you will, of FSBPT, feel free to send those into Rich and his staff so that we can gather this information and make sure our topics stay relevant to the current needs of the membership itself. And then the last thing to get us again warmed up here is the important topic today of kind of onboarding, if you will. And I'm going to try to do this presentation without saying the word training. So that's just going to be my own competition to myself. But the onboarding of board members and staff as they become involved and transition, if you will, into the regulatory community itself. So as I've mentioned, participate and let's make sure I can advance my slides, and we'll keep ourselves moving here. So I'll start out by saying happy holidays wherever you are in the universe. Happy holidays, and hope you have a safe and a family-driven some days off, if you will. But for now, we're going to talk about regulatory issues, and I do want to mention the happy holidays to you. And the other thing that I always do, and I think it's really important, is just the big thank you to each and every one of you who are on the line today, as well as FSBPT and your entire membership. The regulation of the professions, physical therapy and physical therapy assistants in particular, of course, relevant to you, is so important, and you're not thanked enough. There is a lot of scrutiny going on in the world of regulation right now, including examination programs, entry-level or competence examination programs. And there's just not enough thanks and recognition for the volunteerism that I'm surrounded by. And so a big shout out, thank you to not only the board of directors of FSBPT for allowing these sessions to occur, and not only just these regulatory hours, but all your other webinars, your annual meetings, and other programs. But so not only a big thanks to the board of directors, but a thanks to the staff for operationalizing these. But again, the biggest thanks goes to each and every one of you on the line today for your participation as a regulator and ultimately a public protector. You're not thanked enough, and I will certainly thank you. And as part of kind of a continuing, if you will, introduction to myself, many of you may know me, but I'm an attorney. I'm in private practice, and I represent a whole bunch of FSBPT-like organizations. I've done it my entire career, so hopefully my perspectives bring a little bit to you related to your obligations, if you will, and your duties and responsibilities as a regulator. So as mentioned, I'm a lawyer, someone who solves a problem you didn't know you had in a way you can't understand, and that probably sums up the world of regulation of lawyers and myself. So hopefully that makes you chuckle a little bit, and it keeps us involved and engaged. As we roll into the topic now, preparation to serve, as I mentioned earlier, it's such an important topic to ensure that the transition from perhaps a licensee or a public member, whatever role it is that you play as a regulator, is that you understand what regulation is all about and why it's there. And so, why do we even regulate? we've had topics about this earlier in 2023, but you should ask yourselves that, and you should ask your fellow board members, and you should spend perhaps some time contemplating the why of regulation itself before you get into the operational side of the hows and others. But I throw a few words up here that just stimulate us to think a little bit about your knowledge about regulation, your knowledge about laws, your knowledge about due process, your knowledge about legal principles that apply to the world of regulation and how important that they are. And not only the technicality of the legal issues, but group decision making, how that's done, the fact that you need to be a good listener as a regulator, meaningfully participate and prepare for these board meetings themselves, understand what statutes, rules, regulations, policies are, and differentiating between those. And then some of the bigger issues of due process and recusal and fairness and everything else. And it all rolls into, I think, again, an emphasis on government involvement in regulation of the professions, physical therapy and physical therapy assistants, obviously of relevance to you as the listeners today and the participants today. So if you step back, one thing I might suggest that you do is you make a list of all the words you can think of relevant to regulation that allowed you to prepare yourself. And each and every one of you have a reason you're involved, and it's whether you're a board member, a volunteer board member, whether you are a staff, executive director, administrator, an inspector, an investigator, an assistant attorney general, or any role that is that you play, that you understand the why to yourself, the why to the group, and then the how it is actually effectuated. And I'm going to go through the slides today and cite some examples that I think are important to illustrate why this kind of knowledge, background, and understanding is critical to the regulation of all the professions, and obviously including your profession as well. So to make sure you're listening, to make sure I know you're out there, you all can type a 1 or a 2 into the chats, that I know that 1, you know how to use the chat. 2 is you're listening as well. So if you're a sunrise person, put a 1 in there. If you're a sunset person, put a 2 in there. Obviously, from these pictures, we don't know which is which necessarily, but we got some sunrises and some sunsets. So we got some morning people, maybe some evening people. And right here, smack dab in the middle of the day, you are probably full of energy, listening and waiting to participate in today's session. So thank you for that. And keep those chats coming as we continue on. And so further in the chat now, go ahead and type in what capacity you're with your board. Are you a volunteer governor appointed board member? Are you an exec? Are you other staff, if you will, an attorney, others, things that I might miss? So just keep typing those in so that we know. And not only is this helpful to me, but this is helpful to your organization, FSBPT, to track who's on these lines, who attends these seminars and these webinars, and how we can best serve that your organization can best serve the needs of that. So I see a lot of I see a lot of different capacities that are on the call today, and I think that adds a nice depth to the topic of onboarding, preparation, training, being prepared to fulfill your duties and responsibilities as a regulator, regardless of the role that comes into play. So I'm hoping this topic and my slides have some relevance to each and every one of you, no matter what role it is that you play. And then perhaps lastly, we're getting ourselves warmed up here and started. How long have you've been involved with the board? And again, regardless of your role, you could be a newly appointed board member, you could be a veteran or a longtime staff or administrator. So, and I can see a few 6 years, 3 years, a few of these coming up, and some veterans here, and then a few new people, excellent, under 6 months. Now, with that said, I might suggest that this topic and the slides and what we will cover today hopefully is relevant no matter how long or short you've been involved in the regulatory community. It never hurts to take a step back and again assess the big picture issues about regulation and why it is that you're not only on the board, but what it is the board does itself. So we've got 28 years of fun with state licensure boards now. How cool is that? So Rich, there may be a prize in the making for the person who has served the longest with each of their member boards. So we can maybe give away some very expensive prizes if that's okay with you. Continuing on with your chats, did you receive so-called training after your hiring or your appointment? Or were you involved with where you showed up at a meeting and you're in the midst of decision making and others? And so I see a few no's here. There'll probably be a couple of yeses that come up here. And working with as many professions as I work with, I'm actually kind of surprised that there is a lack, if you will, of more formal training of board members and staff once they are hired, appointed, or otherwise. And so there's a few no's, a few yeses, and it's critical. And so I might stop here and suggest that each and every one of you can stimulate this type of onboarding preparation to serve a board within your jurisdictions interprofessionally, in addition to utilizing FSBPT intra-professionally and interstate. So if I said that all correctly, meaning that you can stimulate within your jurisdictions opportunities for board members to get together and receive training and or any kind of onboarding preparation through the AG's office, through FSBPT, and through others, that you as the physical therapy and physical therapy assistant regulators could be the stimulus behind this. So take advantage of thinking about how that could happen. And while I'm on that topic, and I've talked about this in the past, I'm kind of big on this too, and that is you can also intrastate stimulate combined board meetings that are relevant. So physical therapy board may meet with the veterinary board, may meet with the acupuncture board or the massage therapy board or whatever. Who can work on humans, animals? How do your commonalities overlap, and where are their differences? And these combined meetings, I think, can be very enlightening, and also adding to this topic today of preparing you to be a regulator. So I think it's very worthwhile to identify, again, where you have not only commonalities, but the differences. It will help you in the long run resolve those so that you don't become involved in a turf war, if you will, through the regulatory process. And that's not a good picture to paint. And nobody will win that turf war battle, because two things. One is politically, the politicians get involved and start making changes. And then two is, if you're in a turf battle, you probably aren't wearing your regulatory hat. So ideas here percolating. Hopefully they are helpful to you, and you can take some of this back to each of your jurisdictions as well. So there's still a few comments coming up. I'm keeping an eye on those, but Rich and staff, you can keep an eye on as well. And again, if anybody has any questions, feel free to continue to type those in. Now, the last chat here to get us warmed up is, have you attended the greatest, best ever, can't be beat, comprehensive, fun, super valuable FSBPT training that they have? And just a yes or no. And this is where their FSBPT's training is where you receive some comprehensive knowledge and exchange of information. So we see plenty of yeses there, and actually twice there. So get the word out. Get the word out that training is available. And I think, Rich, it's available into 2024. And some dates and others will be posted on the website. So take advantage of that, but also take advantage of ensuring that your fellow board members know what FSBPT is and what it does. And I will say this, that I represent about 9 FSBPT-like organizations. Most all of my clients develop, administer, score, and maintain a uniform licensure exam program, in addition to many other services that are intended to lessen burdens on state government. I'm amazed as to how many board members of member boards, so the individuals of the member boards that know very little about their association of boards like FSBPT or federation, whichever you call it, And so getting that word out, getting to not only the FSBPT training, but the annual meetings and these webinars and elsewhere. So this isn't supposed to be a big commercial for FSBPT, but it is so important that this kind of knowledge be exchanged, that it be disseminated, so that there is opportunity. So boards take advantage of opportunities, but so individuals as well can take advantage of those. So a bunch of yeses there. So glad you could attend those trainings. So board members and staff must be prepared. They have to understand government regulation. And I don't believe that the big picture of government regulation is discussed enough. We dive into the deep end of the pool and we swim around talking about very specified issues, either legal, practical, operational, or otherwise, but we don't enough talk about the pool itself and how important it is to understand government regulation. So in part, I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but we will also get into some of the details. But I'm hoping that everybody takes from this, this is stimulated again to be prepared and to understand some of the bigger picture issues in addition to the nuanced operational details. And I like to start with FSBPT. I've already mentioned you know a lot about your organization. Do your member boards know about it? And do you take advantage of the programs that exist there? And I would suggest that you look into that. And I would also suggest that FSBPT is on every single member board's agenda for every meeting. And now you may not have anything to talk about, or you may say, I just attended this great annual meeting. Here's some of the notes from it. Here are some of the sessions, and here are some of the take-home points that I bring back to you, my member board, and taking advantage of that. And I'm going to again say this is not a commercial for FSBPT and other like organizations, but it is so important that you understand your organization and they're there to serve, and that's what they will do itself. The mission of the organization is listed here. Visit the website and understand these programs. And I'm kind of guessing that most of you on the line today know a lot about FSBPT, but I'm going to emphasize there are many members of member boards that do not know about it. And how can it best be brought to their attention so that you back at your jurisdictional board, your state board itself, can become that much more efficient itself. So you can read the mission statements and identify some of the other issues that might surface, and how it fits in here, but understanding these programs itself. And it's not just an exam program, it's many others that exist, not only by FSBPT, but other FSBPT-like organizations that are out there. So spread the word, make sure that FSBPT is a part of the agendas as best you can, and perhaps keep that word going about the organization itself. Now, the other big picture issue for me is a mindset issue. When you go from a licensee, and I realize there are public members and others that serve on boards, the majority of members on regulatory boards are licensees. So when you go to serve on that board itself, it's an entirely new and different mindset. And that mindset is as a regulator. Now, the knowledge you have of the profession itself is critical, and it's very important. And that's why the majority of members on member boards are licensees. And that's true not only in physical therapy, but all the professions, because of the expertise that is necessary in order to efficiently and effectively regulate the profession. However, when you serve on that board itself, you are serving the public. You are serving the intent of the legislature. You are ensuring that the board itself follows through on what the statute says, and ultimately public protection, which is the bottom line for regulation itself. And it's difficult sometimes for board members, new board members especially, to remove that practitioner, that licensee hat, and put on a regulator hat. But remember, when you remove the licensee hat, the knowledge doesn't go away. It's all about mindset. It's all about perspective. And so this should be emphasized first and foremost, I believe, when board members are being onboarded, when they are being trained as they come forth and ultimately then serve the member board itself, the State Board of Physical Therapy, regardless of what it's called. So it's a really an important mindset issue that's at stake, and you have to think like a regulator. And it's important because the consequences of not thinking like a regulator can be pretty significant. And so reflect upon that for a minute and, jot down some ideas that you think are important to that involve thinking like a regulator. And I think one of the most important is to separate regulation from trade. And again, I've been doing this for 38 plus years, and this is the most difficult concept for some to grasp as they move into this regulatory community through the appointment process by the governor's office or however it works in your jurisdiction. But separating this regulation from trade is not only obviously critical, but it can lead to some pretty significant legal challenges, which is going to lead me to my first example that we'll bring up in a little story that we get to tell here. And with all due respect to the regulators, with all due respect to Louisiana, I'll at least give you some facts. This case is still matriculating its way through the legal system, but in short, the Louisiana State Board of Optometry Examiners was subject to an audit. And we'll stop right there and say, well, gee, when government wants to audit one of its agencies, you all know you are government, right? You know you're an agency, if you will, a board of that is created and authorized to act, delegated with authority through the legislation. You should welcome these types of audits. You should welcome sunset. You should welcome the scrutiny that might be placed upon you so that you can continue to justify why regulation exists and why your board exists. Well, here an audit was done, and it's pretty recent, and it is, let's see, 2023, right? In March of 2023. And this audit revealed some information that suggested or alleged that the Board of Optometry and the state board, the state chapter of the trade association were involved with each other in a manner that financially benefited the trade association. So I'm trying to be careful with my words because the litigation is ongoing, but it was exposed through this audit that over $400,000+ of benefits were given to the trade association by sharing of office space, sharing of personnel, and other issues. And the allegations in this matter center upon the secretary of the board. So this is the regulatory board, the secretary, and I believe secretary treasurer of the Louisiana board also served as the executive director of the state chapter of the trade association at the same time for years. And I know this individual, and I represent ARBO, which is the FSBPT of optometry, and we talked about this issue a lot. That is this commingling of functions appropriate, and how does that work, and how do you separate those two? And so you can think about this, whether you think it's a good or a bad idea, but it led to now that audit that identified $400,000+ of benefits that was realized by the trade association at the expense of the regulatory board. And so you can imagine what comes out of this. Well, first off, now the Louisiana State Board filed a lawsuit against the trade association saying, okay, we need our money. You need to pay us for all the in-kind services, if you will, that you took advantage of. So this lawsuit was filed also in March of 2023. And lo and behold, as you can imagine, the trade association reacted and turned around and filed a lawsuit back against the board, saying that the board was defaming them and some other things with regard to the allegations that were had here. So this is a battle no one's going to win. We know that. This is a battle that the lawyers are going to be the only ones that probably benefit from this. And this is going to be a legal battle where the legislature, I would anticipate, will eventually step in and do something. And when that happens, that's not always the most pleasant thing. It's not always the best end result that we might expect. But this will go on. I'm assuming these cases will be consolidated eventually, and they're going to come to some conclusion, whatever that conclusion is. But it all comes back to this issue of separating trade from regulation. Can you imagine serving both the regulatory board and the state chapter of the trade association in a high capacity? This is not just merely belonging to the trade association and serving on a state board or regulatory board, which happens all the time. It's a matter of benefiting and the allowance of certain things to happen. Now, in the end here, as I've mentioned, nobody's going to win this battle, I don't think. And I will say this, carefully too, because it's still being adjudicated. So I don't know what happened necessarily, but where was the board? Where was the state board of optometry, Louisiana State Board of Optometry, the rest of the board members while this was going on? So it's incumbent upon all of us, you all, as board members and perhaps staff, to ensure that the board fulfills its obligations and its duties and responsibilities as set forth in the legislation. So it seems interesting to me that this could go on for as many years apparently as it had, and no one said anything. No one else said anything. So be vigilant, be aware of this, and identify this. And again, this is said with all due respect to Louisiana and all the boards in Louisiana, but this will be disputed, and there'll be a result here at some point in time, and perhaps we can report on that into the future. So that's an example set for us that we have to take into consideration when we talk about onboarding, training, understanding roles, understanding separation trade from regulation. So moving on to the law, without being all technical, know what law applies. And so go ahead and type into the chat right now what laws apply to your board, and just go ahead and type them in. We can put the Practice Act in there, right? Everybody knows what the Practice Act is. It's the legislation enacted that created and authorized your board and delegated you with the authority to enforce, right? And enforce in the interest of public protection. And you're enforcing regulation of a profession that's in there. And so this hopefully stimulates you all to think it's not always all about the Practice Act. That's a very important piece to it, but we've got open meetings, public records, we've got laws, rules, regs of the Practice Act itself. And keep thinking, because we're not turning you into lawyers, we're turning you into thinkers like regulators, that you understand that there's so much more that may apply to you in there. So we've got state personnel that are kind of flying by me now, but general laws related to health practice, there's confidentiality, there's so many things that we could think of. And I just threw a few down, but if we really thought about this, we could probably add a lot more onto here. The Practice Act itself, open records, government operates in the open. You all should know that, but the rule is you operate in the open and you can go into closed session for very limited reasons. So the exception is closed session. The rule is open session, and that can be open meetings or open records. And the disclosure of or the compliance with open records requests that might be sought by entities, whether they're the Institute for Justice or the media or anybody else. So be prepared for that. You have employment laws, disabilities laws, there are constitutional principles, there are discrimination laws, there are Administrative Procedures Act. There are so many that are involved that you may not be thinking about very often. And this is why you have lawyers that should attend every one of your board meetings and help you anticipate some of the issues. So if your lawyers don't attend your meetings, perhaps you can stimulate a discussion that says, should they, can they, is there a budgetary issue, whatever the case might be, but lawyers should be attending each and every one of your meetings to help you navigate these waters and more related to regulation and understanding. So I've said this a lot before on not only your meetings, but so if you want to mute your lines too, so we don't overhear something we shouldn't overhear. But where was I here? So the meetings itself and how important it is that your meetings are set up in a manner that allow you to read into the record the mission statement of your board, who's in attendance, and opportunities for ensuring that you not only meet your agendas, but you have statistics and data entered into the record and become part of your minutes. Hits to the website, phone calls, number of complaints, how many resolved, how many remain pending, how long it takes on average, applications, how many granted, how many denied, how many remain pending, how long it took on average, renewals. You can think of a lot of things that build a very robust story that tell the world what it is that you do. And it not only tells the world what it is you do, it tells the world you know what you're doing. And that's very important. Come sunset time, come scrutiny of the board itself, and the efficiencies and effectiveness. So there's so much that can be had here. There's so much we could talk about today, but I'm throwing a lot at you because this is kind of the year in review. But we've talked about most of these topics throughout the year itself. So what laws apply? Don't turn yourself into lawyers. Don't need to do that, but you ought to know at least generally what applies so you can see the issues. And pausing quickly on that issue, the issue, and that is if you don't see the issue, you'll never ask the questions and you'll blow past things. So it's really important to identify the issues, which are way more important than answers, way more important that you step back and say, we have an issue here. It's an open records or it's an open meetings issue. Are we complying with the law? And you can seek advice and then you can follow that advice that might come out of that. So what laws apply? Very important there. And probably one of the biggest principles that we all have to have some working knowledge of is the concept of due process. And what is due process and why is it important? So if anybody has any answers to that, type it into the chat or unmute and tell us. But what is due process and why is it important? So as soon as government becomes involved and licensure becomes mandated, okay, I must have a license in order to lawfully engage in the practice as a physical therapist or physical therapy assistant, okay? As soon as government steps in and mandates that, you have to have a process that's fair. Then that process of receiving the license, renewing the license, and perhaps being subjected to an adverse action, to a complaint, to a disciplinary charge, this all has to be done under the guise of fairness. And that's all due process is. That's all you need to know. And it's important because government's involved and it's a mandate and there are consequences to me not getting the license. Okay. And those consequences, by the way, could be criminal. And so there has to be this process, this fair method of assessing the applications, the renewals, the granting of that license, and as I've already mentioned, the potential for an adverse action. So that's what due process is, fairness, and it's important because it is guaranteed under constitutional and statutory principles when government steps up and becomes and requires licensure. So I see a fundamental fairness issue there, and a legal definition of notice, opportunity to be heard, and decisions by a neutral, if you will, or unbiased decision-making body. So and that's a nice outline of the technicalities of due process: notice, heard, decision-making. And so you can keep that in mind. And as long as you know that, you're going to start recognizing issues, you're going to start asking questions, you're going to seek advice, and again, suggested that you follow that advice itself. So government fairness, we've added that to our slides there. And the next issue, and this is particularly close to me because the groups that I represent, and there's some significant scrutiny there's significant scrutiny of examination programs. You have to have some working knowledge about your examination program through FSBPT so that you, as the regulators, as the boards themselves, can sufficiently explain the basis behind the exams themselves. Doesn't mean you need to be a psychometrician or a lawyer or anything else, but it does mean working knowledge of an examination program and the defensibility that surrounds that development process. And we see boards that basically want to say that's somebody else's issue. That's FSBPT's issue. They have a national program and we don't have to worry about it. And while there's some truth to that, you, as the regulators, have to have the working knowledge about an exam program and its development process. Okay. So exams are developed, administered, scored, and maintained. They follow a process that are referred to as the standards, which the book is right there. And how you articulate that when questioned as a regulatory board can be extremely important. Now, there are times when you will refer questions to FSBPT, that's fine, but each and every member board of FSBPT, I think I said FSMTB, sorry, that's another client, but FSBPT, there are times when you, at your jurisdictional level, should be questioned and should be prepared to answer. And it could be a political question, it could be a legal question, it may be a practical question, but there has to be some working knowledge of this. You as regulators cannot ignore the issue and just say that's somebody else's gig. That's what somebody else handles, because you, as the regulators, as each state board, are responsible for issuing that license. And that license is premised upon criteria that are substantiated by the applicant. And one of them might be an exam, a competence exam, to assess that. There's education, exam experience. There could be good moral character, criminal background checks, applications, fees, and otherwise, but in general. So the suggestion here is that you have this understanding about the exam program and the role that it can and should play, and otherwise. So, I might ask, if we were all sitting in the room here, I would pick on a few of you and ask you if the licensure exams are a capstone to an educational program. And, you all can react to that. The answer is no, they're not. And they're built on an entirely different platform and they serve very different purposes. And that's why the laws say you must graduate from an accredited educational program and pass an exam. So there's a difference between the two. The knowledge, you should have this basic knowledge about it to be able to articulate it and then refer it where necessary. Now, the reason I bring that up is not only because I have clients whose examination programs are under some pretty significant scrutiny right now, including some ongoing litigation, but a relatively recent case out of Puerto Rico that deals with the bar exam. And Navarro Colon, they're the plaintiff, graduated from law school in 2001 and took the bar exam 6 years in a row and failed it all 6 times. Okay. Now, why in 2021, she decided to file a lawsuit. And her lawsuit, by the way, was unsuccessful technically because it was beyond the statute of limitations. She waited too long to file the lawsuit. So the lawsuit is over, and she has no recourse for this rule limiting the exam attempts to 6. And that's a rule that was promulgated into law by the Supreme Court in Puerto Rico, and has been tested a few times and has been upheld. So the case is a relatively straightforward garden variety statute of limitations case. Your time is up. You waited too long. You can't adjudicate. We as the courts will not adjudicate your question. But the reason this case is important to me is because what the judge said. And there's a couple of quotes in here, and it's hard for me to read this. My screen is kind of small. I'll look at the bigger screen, and I apologize for reading it, but it's really important. It is conceivable to, in that bracketed, that's the expert witness, the psychometrician. It's inconceivable to the psychometrician that a body in charge of regulating the legal profession in Puerto Rico is unable to explain how the passing score on the exam was set. And so the exam was under scrutiny, of course, and the board was unable to articulate how passing scores are set, how the cut scores are set. And then it goes on to say, or to produce formal documentation regarding this matter. The expert also said that the method for setting the passing score on the Puerto Rico bar exam was used as an example of a flawed and arbitrary procedure 20 years ago in a national law publication, and to date, the board has done nothing to adjust or validate the passing standard. This judge did not want to rule against this plaintiff because part of the plaintiff's argument was the exam is arbitrary and it's not a valid measure of competence, etc. But the judge's hands were tied because of the statute of limitations, but the judge didn't hold back and put this in the opinion itself. The judge also said in a footnote, the extent to which performance on the Puerto Rico bar exam is even an accurate predictor of how one will perform as a practicing lawyer is unclear to the court. So that's a pretty important statement right there. And this judge is I'm assuming is a lawyer and passed the bar exam. But continuing, the undersigned knows plenty of competent and successful attorneys who have failed the Puerto Rico bar exam. But the same token, the undersigned is also aware of licensed attorneys who passed the Puerto Rico bar on the first try and are deficient in analyzing legal issues and in providing competent representation to their clients. Now, it's amazing to me that the judge knows this much about lawyers and how many times they may have taken the bar exam, but that's besides the point. The judge felt it was important to put this in a footnote of the opinion, and it carries on. It appears to the court that the only thing that the Puerto Rico bar exam measures is how well one takes the Puerto Rico bar exam, and the law profession deserves better. And so, again, this is opening the door to a board who is under scrutiny that is unable to explain the examination program. Now, Puerto Rico and I believe Louisiana have their own bar exams, so this is not the multi-state, this is not the uniform bar exam that they're fighting about. But again, in general, each and every one of you on this line ought to have some working knowledge and be able to articulate that the physical therapy exam, the National Physical Therapy Exam, is a valid measure of entry-level competence built upon a platform following the psychometric principles, the standards, which validate the defensibility of the program. Something along those lines. That's a lot of words there to throw out there, but everyone ought to be able to at least articulate that and say, oh, you need all the psychometric analysis? We'll call FSBPT, and we're going to get it for you. But it's the mere articulation of this. This case was actually litigated, meaning there was witnesses and all sorts of testimony, and they never got to the point of how it may have been validated. So it's working knowledge, it's general general understandings and otherwise that again can be so important. And I don't want to overemphasize this, but as I've mentioned, I do have clients whose exam programs are under scrutiny based upon performance data that was recently released, and it has led to again an examination of these programs, these competence assessments. And in general, I welcome the assessments. In fact, quite frankly, licensure exams, entry-level competence exams, are probably the only measure that can be defended and that is not subjective related to all license eligibility criteria. Think about an educational program. First off, what does accredited mean? Who accredits? How many unaccredited programs are there? What is the application process, the admissions, the denials? What is the matriculation through the educational programs? Who writes the exams given in the educational programs? And you ultimately then graduate. Tell me about attrition rates, retention, and all the other things that accrediting bodies look at, and give me that data. And then in some professions, you need supervision, and who's making the decision that you meet the qualifications? The supervisor. Yet the exams are the ones that are under scrutiny right now, and it's probably the only measure that can be defended through the psychometric process. So it's an interesting world we're living in right now, and the reactions, of course, are knee-jerk reactions. But as soon as the politicians step in, well before that, but politicians are starting to step in and removing the exam requirements from licensure eligibility in some of the jurisdictions. So we'll keep an eye on that, but it's worthy of noting. And I don't want to be on a soapbox too much, but it's really important for each and every one of your boards to think about that. So this is the added scrutiny of the exam programs themselves. And then in addition to scrutiny of the exam programs, there are alternate pathways that are being considered to eliminate, or to, I shouldn't say eliminate, to provide an alternate method to become licensed without having to take that competence examination. So once again, it's interesting how there's such a focus on that when the subjective nature of the remaining aspects of licensure eligibility are not being focused upon. And this is especially important, I think, when it comes to student debt, the length of time it takes to graduate from a program, no matter what profession we're talking about, and otherwise. So this slide is in here because Oregon, I think, is the first state now that is beginning in July of 2024, providing an alternate pathway to licensure where you do not have to take or pass the bar examination. And it's interesting, and you all can Google this and look it up, but it's interesting because they're removing this objective defensible measure and saying if you work for 675 hours under the supervision of a lawyer, a licensed attorney, if you submit, and I think it was 8 writing samples that you have written as this lawyer wannabe working under supervision, you have to have conducted a couple of interviews with clients, you have to have conducted a couple of negotiations for resolutions and otherwise. But all this is going to be submitted to the bar, to the Supreme Court and the Board of Bar Examiners in Oregon. And somebody's going to have to then read all this and say, okay, this person should get a license. Or more importantly, what happens when they say, no, you're not going to get a license? Your writing samples aren't good enough. Under what standard would those writing samples be assessed? Under what standard would the interviews that you are being scrutinized have undertaken? How will those be assessed? And by the way, what about confidentiality? And the whole attorney-client privilege issues that might exist depending upon the circumstances. So I think as the world and as the political community considers the alternate pathways, think about how it affects you as the regulator and how you're going to then have to potentially review and then rule upon a wide variety of submissions that are not going to be subject to any standards that I can think of, at least now. So this will evolve. I'm not speaking against alternate pathways, but it will create issues for you all as the regulators themselves. So I'm back to this slide again, and I want to open this up for questions or comments or chats or anything that anybody wants to say. We have a few minutes remaining about not only these words, but a lot of the things that I've talked about today, or any of the training or onboarding that you received that you liked or maybe didn't like, or if you want to talk about how great the FSBPT training board member training program is, you can do that for sure. But again, hopefully you chuckle a little bit on that. So is there anybody that wants to unmute and speak about the topics and or how you felt in regarding your preparation and your ability to step in and serve as a regulator? Chats or unmute and go ahead and speak. If it's quiet, you may get 10 minutes back of your time to go on and your professional worlds. But anybody have anything to say, comments or questions? I purposely wanted to leave a little bit of time here at the end to have somebody unmute. But if not, there's a thank you there. You're more than welcome. These are my favorite things to do, is try to engage in discussions about these important issues. And I know it's difficult sometimes online versus in person, but
and Dale, while we give folks just a few more moments to consider that and maybe get some questions in the chat, I did want to highlight that the next regulatory training or onboarding from the FSBPT is scheduled for May 16th, 17th, and 18th. We listen to membership and what you're looking for, so you'll note that that's Thursday, Friday, Saturday, shifting the time on that. It's also a hybrid meeting, so there's an opportunity to attend in the way that works best for you. So get that on your calendars if you have any questions about that event or content, and spread the word on that as well. And I think we got ourselves a question, Dale.
So over time, any thoughts on how to structure it over a year? Well, one way over a year is to have them attend the webinars of FSVPT. And so they're there, they're available, and we do try to address topics that I think are important to this so-called onboarding or training or preparation for board members themselves. And this is a really good point, by the way, Kathy, and that is if I were an administrator of a board, executive director, or what have you, I would want to do some kind of fun training, and I would think of a word other than training, but some kind of fun training at every board meeting to identify an issue that I thought was important. And it would be a part of it, and it might be just a 10-minute exercise that gets board members talking to each other and with staff and interacting. So you could do it at every single board meeting if you tried, and you could make it, again, challenging but fun, entertaining to the extent that you can, but spend a little bit of time on important issues. So what a good point. And I'm glad you brought that up. It gives us an opportunity to say, put it on every agenda, just like FSBPT ought to be on every agenda. And it may be a 1-minute discussion, and maybe a 10-minute discussion, but take the time, don't ignore opportunities. Great point. And Michelle, a little bit quiet here, so I will turn it back over to you for any closing comments, but I will end my remarks by how I started them. Again, a big thanks for not only being here today, but for what you do for regulation of the profession of physical therapy and physical therapy assistants. And so you are to be commended. And I appreciate not only what you do at each of your jurisdictional levels, but you took out a little bit of time today to listen to us chat a little bit. Hopefully it stimulated some thought, but a big, giant thanks to each and every one of you. So Michelle, back to you.
Thanks, Dale, and thanks to everyone for attending today. If you have any follow-up, be sure to send us a note. And with that, I will just wish everyone a wonderful end to 2023. Thank you and take care.